start the live stream and change the host. And this round is good to begin.
One moment, can we have screen recording permission in here for
Yes.
Abia Bakai?
Yes, hold on one second. So I apologize, Ms. McCormick, if you could make me the host again so that I can allow that screen recording permission. And I can walk you through that if I need to. Oh, great.
There you go.
Right. Who should I give recording permission to?
For the defense, if you could give it to Abia Bakai or Harper Martini, that would be wonderful.
All right, I have done that.
Thank you so much.
All right, great. This round can begin. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, timekeeper, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Judges Avance and is it Vinky? Did I get close?
Yes, you did. I'm ready.
Okay, good. All
Yes,
right.
ready to.
All right. We're going to call the case of the Estates of Genesis Petrillo versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. I'm the presiding judge, Paige McCormick. We're going to be in gallery view, and the judges should have audio and video off, and we should be in the non-video participant setting. And I'm going to have all the attorneys make an appearance and introduce yourself, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Gunnar Osteen, and alongside my co-counsel, Gabriella Midford.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Fabiola Valentin.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
We'll be representing the plaintiff in today's case.
Thank you. And for defense?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Darius Parak, and I, along with my co-counsel, Mr. Akshay Thakur.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Ms. Anaga Chandramoli.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Represent the defendant in this case, Ms. Harper Martini.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Once the plaintiff is done with their pretrial matters, we do have a few matters in which to attend to.
All right. Are y'all ready to proceed with pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, just for a bit of brief background, the plaintiff is pursuing a charge of battery against the defendant, Harper Martini, for the intentional poisoning of Genesis Petrillo. Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to invoke Rule 615, or the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives, and in today's case, the plaintiff has no party rep, Your Honor.
That would be allowed.
And Your Honor, in this jurisdiction, it's assumed that objections are heard constructively outside the earshot of the jury. May we assume the same in your courtroom?
Yes, sure. Yes.
And Your Honor, just for the smoothness of today's proceedings, would you like us to ask permission before we share our screen for demos or evidence, or would you simply like us to announce it for the sake of the record?
Just let the record know that that's what you're doing so that opposing counsel also knows that that's what you're doing, and let them know what it is that you are displaying.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the plaintiff is ready for trial.
All right. Defense, do you have any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we'd like to designate Ms. Harper Martini as our party representative for these proceedings.
All right. Thank you.
And we'd also like to invoke Midland's Rules of Evidence 603, which constructively swears in all witnesses.
All right.
Other than that, we have no pretrial matters to attend to. The defense is ready to begin with opening statements.
All right. Thank you. All right. Plaintiff, you may begin with opening statements.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. On June 8th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo was going to marry the love of her life. She was going to start a new chapter, one filled with love and hope. However, Genesis never got to walk down the aisle. She never said, "I do." Instead, her life abruptly ended on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning on the morning of her wedding. Members of the jury today will follow that pesticide from the defendant to the bottle, to the victim. First, the defendant. You'll hear today how Genesis and the defendant, her fiance's mother, didn't get along. You'll hear how Genesis and the defendant fought in the months leading up to the wedding. You'll hear from the victim's closest friend how the defendant wanted Genesis to disappear. Most importantly, members of the jury, today you'll hear that the defendant hated Genesis, that she would do anything, pay anything, to keep Genesis from marrying her son. On the night before the wedding, the defendant saw an opportunity to stop the wedding once and for all. Next, the bottle. You'll hear how the defendant was planning on giving a bottle of wine to Genesis Petrillo, a unique red blend no one else would share. A bottle of Cara wine especially made for Genesis Petrillo. Now today you'll hear from the wedding caterer that day how the defendant was finalizing wedding gifts, among them the bottle of Cara wine, when the defendant was seen holding a canister of pesticide. Today you'll learn, members of the jury, how it is in that kitchen, alone, that the defendant poisoned the bottle of Cara wine she had made for Genesis. Members of the jury, you'll hear from the caterer how the defendant hoped that bottle would solve her problems forever. Finally, the victim. You'll hear from the victim's closest friend how the defendant gives the bottle of wine to Genesis Petrillo. But you also hear that it's only after she receives that bottle of wine that Genesis becomes sick. It's only after she receives that bottle of wine that Genesis is rushed to the hospital. You'll hear from the ER doctor that night just how severe Genesis' symptoms were. Her pupils were severely contracted, her pulse was slow, she couldn't breathe. The doctor realizes she's ingested something poisonous. He rushes to her care, but it is too late. Genesis Petrillo dies of pesticide poisoning on the morning of her wedding. Now, as the plaintiff, we've brought a claim of battery against the defendant, Harper Martini. That means we bear the burden of proof in today's case. We must prove to you, by a preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not, that the defendant poisoned the bottle of wine, that she did so with the intent to harm Genesis, and that it was after drinking that bottle of wine that Genesis suffered harm. Members of the jury, that's exactly what we will do today. Genesis deserved to live a long and happy life alongside her soulmate. Instead, her life was tragically taken from us because the defendant didn't want her to marry her son. Members of the jury, follow the pesticide from the defendant to the bottle to the victim. Thank you.
Opening from the defense, Your Honor.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Harper poisoned Danny's business, so Danny poisoned Harper's wine. It's June 7th, 2019. Two people are about to get married, surrounded by their friends and family. The bride's mother-in-law is there, and she's just as excited as the happy couple. She gives her daughter-in-law a bottle of wine to symbolize their new relationship. But the next morning, she learns that her daughter-in-law was rushed to the hospital, fell into a coma, and died. She learns that she's being blamed for her daughter-in-law's death. But what she doesn't know is that the wine she gave her daughter-in-law was actually poisoned by her jealous business rival. When you follow the poison as the plaintiff wants you to, you'll see that the person responsible is Danny Francazia. That's why we're here today. The plaintiff has brought one count of battery against Harper Martini for poisoning her daughter-in-law-to-be, Genesis Petrillo. They have to prove not only that Miss Martini had intent to harm Miss Petrillo, they also have to prove how and when Miss Martini put pesticide into the wine. But members of the jury, you won't hear a single witness today tell you that they saw Miss Martini put pesticide into the wine. That's because it wasn't her. The evidence will show that it was Danny Francasio, the owner of the only other winery in this part of the state. You'll learn that competition from Miss Martini's winery caused Miss Francasio's to suffer. That's when she vowed to do whatever it took to destroy Miss Martini's business. The evidence will show that after Harper poisoned Danny's business, Danny poisoned Harper's wine. To show you what really happened, we'll call 3 witnesses. First, you'll hear from Dr. Richard Cannon, an expert in toxicology. Dr. Cannon will explain that there's no way to tell how the pesticide was put in the wine, no way to tell when it was put in the wine, and no way to tell who put it there. But you'll learn that there was only one person who stood to gain. You'll hear from Austin Lewis, a winemaker who worked for both Miss Martini and Miss Francasio. Mr. Lewis will explain that as Miss Martini's winery gained customers and clout, Miss Francasio only became more resentful. The evidence will show that Miss Martini's winery poisoned Miss Francasio's, replacing it as the #1 winery in the area. Finally, you'll hear from Miss Martini herself. She'll tell you that just 1 month before the wedding, she found an intruder in the winery's bottling area. An intruder she recognized as one of Miss Francasio's employees. She immediately removed the intruder from the area, but you'll learn that the damage was done. The evidence will show that Miss Francasio succeeded in poisoning Miss Martini's wine and destroying her business. Members of the jury, the evidence will show that after Harper poisoned Danny's business, it was Danny who poisoned her wine. That's why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Anaga Chandramoli, will ask that you find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Is plaintiff ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez.
All right. All right, Ms. Rodriguez?
All right, Ms. Rodriguez. Now, before I begin, can you see and hear me all right?
Yeah, I can.
All right, Ms. Rodriguez. Could you do me a favor and introduce yourself to the jury?
Good morning. My name is Angel Rodriguez.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Rodriguez?
Well, I work as a kindergarten teacher at Rapid River Valley Elementary School, but I have to be completely honest. I'm quitting next week. In the last year, I've kind of realized that I can't really stand those critters and their grimy hands and their booger eating and the snot on the sleeve. I just can't deal with it anymore.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, how did you get to know Genesis and Casey?
Well, they were my best friends. I first met Casey and Genesis during a trivia night. I was just about to win when someone across the room sneezed, and do you know how far a sneeze travels? A maximum of 15 feet, and I was well within that range. Luckily, Casey walked right past me when it happened and took the hit. From then on, we've been the best of friends.
So, Ms. Rodriguez, how are you related to today's case in particular?
Well, I was a part of the wedding party. I was there the day of the rehearsal when Genesis passed away.
Well, Ms. Rodriguez, let's get into the night of that rehearsal dinner. Could you tell us a bit about what happened?
I mean, it was a real beautiful party. Toasts were made, food was served. Genesis and Casey were all dolled up. It was really a beautiful day.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you saw between Genesis and the defendant on that night in particular?
I saw fighting, and more fighting. At one point, it got so bad that I witnessed Harper tell Genesis that she was going to make Genesis disappear.
Well, what happened after you heard the defendant tell the victim that she could make him disappear.
Well, after that, I saw Genesis walk up to Harper, but before she could get a word out, Harper grabbed her by the arm and yanked her into the hallway.
Hold on, Miss Rodriguez. Did you speak to Genesis about the defendant yanking him into a hallway?
Yeah, I asked her about it, and her response was that she was afraid that Harper was going to kill her.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Response, Your Honor.
It's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Miss Martini or Miss Rodriguez, was that the last time you saw the defendant before the rehearsal dinner?
No, a little before the rehearsal dinner, I saw her again.
Well, could you tell us what she was doing?
She was making her way to the kitchen holding this big can of pesticide.
Well, did you ask the defendant what she was doing with that big can of pesticide?
Well, she said that it was for Genesis, but I'd like to think she was joking. I didn't really find it that funny after she just kind of walked away.
So after you saw the defendant walking with a can of pesticide, what went ahead and happened after that?
Well, that's when the rehearsal dinner started. Everyone was giving toast, congratulating Casey and Genesis. And then Harper stood up and made this big speech and gave a special bottle of wine to Genesis.
Well, could you tell us what was so special about that bottle?
Well, Genesis was the only one who I saw received the bottle. Everyone else, including myself, was given a bottle called Horizon.
So now that all these bottles have been passed out, that bottle of Cara has been given to Genesis, what went ahead and happened after that?
Well, Genesis went ahead and popped open her bottle of Cara and drank a couple of glasses. She even offered me a sip, which I was hesitant to take because of the germ transferring and the backwash, but it was her special day, so I took a sip, but I immediately spit it out because of the taste.
Well, what went ahead and happened after you had that, spit out that bottle of Cara?
Well, after Genesis and I stayed up drinking and talking about old times, around 11 p.m., I noticed that Jen seemed pretty out of it. She was passed out in her chair, so I decided to haul her up and take her back to the room.
So what ended up happening after you got Genesis back to her room?
Well, Genesis started vomiting and convulsing, and she seemed to be getting worse, so I went ahead and I called 911. EMTs came soon after and rushed her to the hospital, and I went along and I waited. I waited in the hospital till about 8 a.m. I even slept on those filthy waiting room sofas, and when I woke up, I decided that I had to let everyone else know what had happened, so I made my way back to Peony Estates.
Well, Miss Rodriguez, who did you first talk to after returning to Peony Estates?
The first person that I talked to was Harper. I was about to tell her what had happened, but before I could get anything out, she just said, "Genesis got sick? Oh no, I guess there'll be no wedding now." It really took me by surprise.
Why did the defendant, knowing about the condition Genesis was in, surprise you?
Well, I don't have any idea as to how Harper knew about Genesis being sick. I mean, I hadn't talked to anyone at the wedding or while I was waiting in the hospital, so as to how Harper found out it's beyond me.
Well, what did you do next?
Well, after she said that, I moved on to Casey's room where I told him what was happening, and we immediately rushed back to the hospital to check on Genesis, but as soon as we got there, we were told that Jen had passed away.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. I now pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Rodriguez.
Good afternoon.
I want to talk to you about the night of the rehearsal dinner. There was a bar there, correct?
Yeah, there was a bar.
Now, I want to make this easy, so I'm going to split the night in two. The time before the toasts and the time after the toasts, okay?
Right.
So before the toasts were over, you'd already lost count of all of your drinks, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Now, I want to break down the drinks that you do remember from after the toasts. You had a cocktail,
Yeah.
maybe two.
Perhaps, yeah.
And then that's when Miss Petria ordered some tequila shots.
Yeah.
Genesis didn't have any.
I'm not sure about that. I know she ordered them.
You had some of those tequila shots, though, didn't you?
Yeah.
So after having the cocktails, plus the tequila shots, and all of the drinks that you can't remember, it would be correct to say that you were drunk that evening.
I was a bit drunk, but I can handle myself when I'm drunk. I pride myself in that.
So that's a yes to my question. You were drunk that evening?
Yeah.
Okay. And at the hospital, you were still a bit hungover, weren't you?
I was a bit hungover, but nothing too serious.
Well, maybe even a little drunk.
Oh, perhaps a little.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, I want to talk now about something you mentioned on direct examination. You saw Miss Martini in the hallway, didn't you?
Yeah.
She was carrying a can of pesticide,
Yeah.
and you said she was heading towards the kitchen,
That's correct.
but you didn't see her enter into the kitchen, did you?
No.
You never saw her use this pesticide?
No.
Never saw her spray it?
No.
She just walked away.
Yeah, she walked away after I talked to her.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. No further questions. I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. We simply ask that Ms. Rodriguez be excused.
That'll be allowed. All right. Plaintiff may call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls Sam Arnold to the stand.
All right. Mr. Arnold?
Mr. Arnold, I believe that you may be on mute, sir.
All right, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Sounds perfect.
All right.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Yeah. Hi. My name is Sam Arnold. It's real nice to meet all of you.
Mr. Arnold, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a caterer here in Midlands. I used to own my own restaurant, but it was a little too French for the area. So back in 2015, I opened up Arnold's Eatery, with an A instead of an E. I just love the alliteration. I think it's part of why I've been so successful.
So why are you here today?
Yeah. I catered the wedding and the wedding rehearsal for Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo. I was involved with planning a lot of the wedding as it related to food.
How did you end up getting involved with catering the wedding?
Sure. So I think it was back in 2016. My business was struggling a little bit, and that's when I met Harper. And once I met Harper, we just started having this real great working relationship. Things started to turn a corner, and it started a real great working relationship with Harper. So that's how I knew Harper and got involved with the wedding.
Mr. Arnold, did you know anyone else that was involved with the wedding?
Let's see. So I knew my staff, of course. I knew the wedding planner, Blair Osborne. We'd worked on a couple of things together before. Let's see who else. Well, I of course knew Casey and Genesis because we met a couple of times when discussing the menu and that sort of stuff.
How much did you know about the victim, Genesis Petrillo?
Not a lot. All I really knew about Genesis was stuff I was hearing from Harper. And Harper just would always say that Genesis was lazy, selfish, immature, how she wanted anyone else but Genesis to be marrying Casey. And, from the way Harper talked about Genesis, it seemed like they got along about as well as pillows and hand grenades, if you take my meaning.
Mr. Arnold, did their relationship ever seem to improve to you?
Oh, no. Every time I saw the two of them talking, they were fighting.
Now, I want to move on and talk about the wedding rehearsal. Were you there?
Yeah, I was.
So how did that day start out for you?
Let's see. I showed up to Peony Estates at around 11 in the morning, I think, and I made a beeline straight for the kitchen to make sure food prep was going okay.
Did you see anything while you were in the kitchen?
There was one thing that really jumped out at me. There was this can of pesticide that Hopper had, which was pretty odd.
So did the defendant say why they had this can of pesticide while they were in the kitchen?
Hopper really didn't say much about the can of pesticide. All that she said was that she was finalizing gifts for the wedding guests. You know, it was a whole bunch of wine bottles that were all the same except for one.
Do you think you could recognize that one wine bottle that was different, as well as the label?
Yeah, I think so.
Your Honor, permission to put a pre-admitted Exhibit 2A and 2B.
That's granted.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Arnold, is that the wine bottle and the label?
Yeah. It's a red blend called Cara. Yeah, that's the one.
Did the defendant ever say anything about this wine bottle?
She said that it was made special for Genesis and that she hoped it would solve all of her problems forever.
Did the defendant explain what she meant by that to you?
No, and I didn't ask. You know, Hopper just said that she wanted me to make sure that I was handing out the wine bottles. She asked me to make sure that I was the one to hand the Cara to Genesis. After that, I left and just went back to my planning.
How did the rest of the rehearsal go?
Pretty smooth. A little tacky for my taste, but you know, I'm just involved with the food, not the decor. But after that happened, the dinner was done. I gave out all the wine bottles like planned. When I gave Genesis the bottle of wine, Hopper said something about Genesis needing to drink the wine bottle alone. You know, I thought that was pretty odd. You know, good wine is meant to be shared. I do my fair share of that, but you know, it wasn't my wedding, not my toast, so I just held my tongue.
So after the defendant said that, did you see the victim share that wine with anyone else?
Come to think of it, no, I didn't see anyone else drinking that wine.
So what happened after the defendant gave the victim that different bottle of wine?
I didn't really see much of what happened that night. I left pretty soon after. But when I got back to Peony the following morning, I found out that at some point in the night, Genesis had been rushed to the hospital and unfortunately passed. Of course, the wedding was canceled.
Pass the witness at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Arnold.
Afternoon.
I want to talk about the evening of June 7th, 2019, the wedding rehearsal.
Sure.
You were at Peony Estates as a caterer.
I was, yeah.
So you went into the kitchen to prepare, right?
That's exactly right, yeah.
And you saw Miss Martini in the kitchen.
I did, yeah.
She was arranging bottles as gifts for the wedding.
Yeah, that's what she said, yeah.
And you also said you saw a canister of pesticide next to her, right?
Yeah, it was in the kitchen with her, yeah.
Now, when you asked Miss Martini what it was for.
I did, yeah.
And she told you it was for pests like Genesis and said she was just kidding, right?
Yeah, weird joke. You know, pesticides are real dangerous, but whatever. You know, I guess she thought it was funny.
So she did tell you what they were for?
Yeah, kinda. She made a joke about it being for Genesis, but I suppose so, yeah.
Now, when you asked her what the bottle of pesticide was for, Miss Martini didn't try to hide the bottle of pesticide from you, did she?
Nope, just made a joke.
She didn't seem nervous when you asked her?
I guess not. I don't really know.
Well, you were standing and watching her, right, Mr. Arnold?
Yeah,
And she didn't seem nervous or sweating to you, did she?
I wasn't paying that close of attention. As far as I could tell, she just made a joke. I don't know if she was nervous, but I couldn't tell you. Sorry.
All right, Miss Arnold, that's perfect. Mr. Arnold, that's perfectly all right. Now, to be clear, you saw Miss Martini with the bottles of wine and the pesticide in the kitchen, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
You didn't see her in the bottling area of the winery, did you?
No, that's right through a door, right next door.
But you didn't see her in there?
No, I was concerned with the kitchen. I prepared the food.
Of course. And when you saw her with both of these things, you never saw Miss Martini uncork that bottle of Cara wine.
Not that I specifically remember. She was doing a lot of like fiddling with the bottles. But I don't think I saw uncorking anything.
You never saw her put pesticide into the bottle of wine, did you?
No, of course not.
You never saw her recorking that bottle with the machine, did you?
I don't think so, no.
In fact, Mr. Arnold, you have no idea how the pesticide actually got into the wine, right?
Yeah, no one's told me anything about it. Yeah.
You don't know if someone else put pesticide into that bottle of wine at a different date?
I couldn't tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Your Honor, at this time I pass the witness.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. Just ask that Mr. Arnold could be dismissed.
That's granted.
All right, pleasure meeting all of you.
You may be excused, Mr. Arnold. Plaintiff may call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls Dr. Jim Kwan to the stand.
Dr. Kwan?
Good evening, Dr. Kwan. Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Dr. Jim Kwan.
And how are you related to today's case?
I was the treating physician in the emergency room for Genesis Petrillo whenever she entered my hospital.
What are your qualifications to discuss today's case, Dr. Kwan?
I received my bachelor's in biology from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and then I moved on to get my medical degree at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. After that, I completed my residency and fellowship in toxicology at Emory University School of Medicine. And now I'm the chief physician at the River Valley Hospital right here in Midlands.
What do you do as the chief physician at River Valley Hospital?
Well, I lead a team of nurses and doctors in diagnosing, testing, and treating patients. In short, our job is to save lives.
What method do you use when diagnosing and treating these patients?
We use the method that's standard in the field. It's called the C method. My wife likes to joke that I'm the old man in the C, but I digress. It stands for Standard Emergency Admittance Method. It just means that we observe symptoms, rule out possible alternative causes, and then determine a course of treatment.
Is this method reliable in your field?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, it's widely accepted.
Did you use this particular method, the C method, when treating Genesis Petrillo on June 8, 2019?
Yes, I use it with all of my patients.
Did you have all the information you needed when treating Genesis?
Yeah, honestly, all we really need is the patient and maybe a couple of medical records.
Now, Dr. Kwan, I actually want to talk about the day that you met Genesis Petrillo. What happened?
Well, I was on break. I was actually supposed to go home and see my kids, but I got a page that there was an ambulance coming in with somebody that I later learned was Genesis Petrillo. And as she was wheeled into the hospital, I noticed that she was suffering from some pretty severe symptoms. And it was at that point that I began my analysis of the patient. I made a presentation that may make my testimony a little bit easier to follow.
Your Honor, May the record reflect that the witness will be sharing his screen to use the presentation he prepared for today.
Right, thank you. That's granted.
Now, Dr. Kwan, now that we have a presentation, can you go ahead and tell us what your analysis entailed?
Well, whenever Ms. Petrillo entered the hospital, I began my initial examination. I checked her vitals and checked her heartbeat and took samples of her vomit. So I noticed that she was having trouble walking, and she was vomiting, and she was slurring her speech.
What was that consistent with?
Well, that made me suspicious that she may have been suffering from alcohol poisoning just based on that initial cursory examination.
So once you saw these symptoms, what did you do next?
Well, I decided that I needed to delve deeper because I wasn't seeing all of the symptoms that you would expect with alcohol poisoning. And I noticed some additional concerning symptoms, those including that she was experiencing stomach pain, she was having trouble breathing, her pulse was slow, she had contracted pupils, she was sweating and tearing excessively, and she was showing signs of involuntary muscle spasms.
So were these consistent with alcohol poisoning?
No, actually, at this point, this allowed me to rule out alcohol poisoning as the cause of these symptoms because they are either inconsistent or in some of these cases, completely contradictory.
Once you ruled out alcohol poisoning, what did you proceed to do?
Well, I became suspicious that Ms. Petrillo had possibly ingested something toxic, and as a result, I ordered a poisons and toxins analysis.
What did that toxins analysis tell you?
Well, it confirmed my suspicion that Ms. Petrillo had in fact ingested something toxic. It was an organophosphate pesticide, which can be extremely deadly.
I'm sorry, Dr. Kwan, what's an organophosphate pesticide?
Oh, right. Well, there's different types of pesticides. There's the type that you see maybe at the store, like off, comes in a little orange can. But there are other types that are used in a more industrial or agricultural setting. Organophosphate pesticide is one of those pesticides. It's a chemical pesticide that's used on a large scale in an attempt to drive away bugs. And it's deadly to bugs, but it can also be deadly to humans.
How can one come into contact with an organophosphate pesticide?
Well, there are three main ways. Since this pesticide is sprayed out in the form of an aerosol, it can be inhaled directly, but there was no evidence to support this because there was no throat irritation being exhibited in Ms. Petrillo. It can also be absorbed through the skin. It'll just go right through your pores and straight into your bloodstream. But that also causes a rash, which I did not observe in Ms. Petrillo. And lastly, it can be ingested directly, like through food or drink, if that food or drink is contaminated.
How do you believe Genesis come into contact with the organophosphate pesticide?
Well, because there was no evidence of inhalation or skin contact, I proceeded on the belief that Ms. Petrillo had ingested the pesticide directly through some sort of food or drink.
Now, were all of the symptoms that Genesis Petrillo was showing, were they consistent with organophosphate pesticide poisoning?
Yes, actually, every single one of the symptoms that I observed in Genesis Petrillo was completely consistent with her suffering from an organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
Once you had this realization, what did you do?
Well, I realized that Ms. Petrillo's symptoms had reached an advanced point and that I needed to act quickly. So I administered the antidote for organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
Did the antidote help?
Unfortunately, we were too late. Ms. Petrillo fell into a coughing fit and began to seize, and then she fell into a coma. Later that morning, she passed away.
Now I want to make it very clear for the jury, what do you believe caused Genesis Petrillo's death?
Based on my analysis of the victim's symptoms and the test results the tests that I performed on the victim, I concluded that Ms. Petrillo had ingested a pesticide from a wine bottle and that it caused respiratory arrest and ultimately
Objection,
her
Your
death.
Honor. Under Rule 702C, we've heard no foundation to say how this witness used a method to determine that the pesticide came from the bottle of wine.
Would you like to take the witness on voir dire?
No, Your Honor. It is the defense's belief that this foundation can be laid. It's just that opposing counsel has not laid this foundation in this examination.
Does plaintiff have a response?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe we have, in fact, laid the foundation. We went into the details of the method the doctor used, the C method, that he uses to diagnose and treat the patient. Throughout that method, he actually ran a toxicology report where he found there was organophosphate poisoning. And then he explained how he had crossed out the ways that Genesis Petrillo could have come in contact with such poison. And that's how he determined that the victim could have swallowed the poison. We went into very much detail on that in the previous questions, Your Honor.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Sure.
While enough foundation may have been laid to say that Ms. Petrillo swallowed the pesticide, we heard nothing about this witness's analysis of all of the things that Ms. Petrillo ate and drank, or even mention of the fact that a wine bottle was drank by Ms. Petrillo. This foundation needs to be laid in order for this witness to come to that conclusion.
I'll sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
No, Dr. Kwan, what do you believe caused Genesis Petrillo's death?
Well, I determined that Miss Petrillo had ingested the wine or had ingested the pesticide through wine that she had drank that night. I realized this through a test that I performed on Miss Petrillo, wherein I found pesticide in the stomach mixed in with wine that was also in Miss Petrillo's stomach. The food contents in her stomach tested negative for pesticides. So as a result, I was able to conclude that Miss Petrillo drank wine that night that was contaminated with pesticide, and as a result, passed away.
Thank you, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Before cross-examination, Your Honor, I request that the demonstrative that Dr. Kwan was referring to actually be screen shared.
That's allowed. Can plaintiff's attorney have that available when requested?
Perfect. Good afternoon, Dr. Kwan.
Hi.
Now, in this chart, you used red X's to mark symptoms that did not align with a particular diagnosis.
That's correct.
You used a red X for stomach pain under alcohol poisoning, right?
That's correct.
So it's your testimony today that stomach pain is not a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
Yes.
Dr. Kwan, you wrote a report in preparation for today's case, correct?
I did.
You were truthful and accurate in that statement?
Of course.
And you knew the importance of being precise in that statement, correct?
Yes, and I was.
If you could please stop screen sharing so that my co-counsel can please screen share this witness's report. Dr. Kwan, if we scroll to the top, this is your report. Yes?
It is.
And at the bottom, we see your signature.
Yes.
Turning court and counsel's attention to line 46 of this witness's report, Dr. Kwan, please read along silently as I read aloud. Some of Petrillo's reported symptoms, including the nausea, vomiting, slurred speech, and stomach pain, were consistent with the diagnosis of alcohol poisoning. Thank you for sharing your screen, co-counsel. Now, Dr. Kwan, I'd like to talk about some of the limits of your conclusion. You
I'm
ran
sorry,
a poison.
counsel, could I explain what I meant by stomach pain in that context?
I'm sorry, Dr. Kwan, I have a lot of questions to ask you today. You ran a poisons and toxicology analysis, right?
Yes, I did.
And that tests for the presence of pesticide.
Yes, it does.
It returns either a positive or a negative.
Yes.
It doesn't tell you about the amount of pesticide present in the sample.
No, it does not.
So you can't give us an exact measurement of how much pesticide Ms. Petrillo consumed.
No, I cannot.
You also can't tell us how much pesticide was in the bottle of wine that she drank.
No, we did test, or that bottle of wine was tested, and it did test positive for pesticides at a certain concentration, but we can't say definitively what the concentration was when the wine was in the bottle.
So it's a yes to my question. You can't give us an exact measurement of how much pesticide was in that bottle of wine.
Not to a medical degree of scientific certainty, but that's not necessary for my conclusion.
Dr. Kwan, you don't need to be certain to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty for your conclusions today.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
So to clarify, Dr. Kwan, you cannot give us the measurement how much pesticide was in that bottle of wine.
No, I can't.
You also can't tell us how the pesticide got into the wine.
No.
You can't tell us when the pesticide was put into the wine.
No, I can't.
You can't tell us if Harper Martini put pesticide into that bottle of wine.
No.
You can't tell us if any one specific person put pesticide into that bottle of wine.
No.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that my witness is excused.
That's granted. Dr. Kwan, you may be excused.
And at this time, the plaintiff rests its case in chief, and we just ask for a 5 to 10 minute recess before the defense opening case.
All right, let's start with a 5-minute break. If the timekeeper will let us know when 5 minutes are up.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, that concludes the 5-minute break.
All right, thank you.
Your Honor, may the defense call our first witness?
Let's make sure everyone's back. Is everyone back that should be back? Anyone missing? All right. Hearing nothing, we are ready to proceed. Defense, you may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Richard Cannon.
All right, Dr. Cannon,
May we proceed, Your Honor?
you may.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cannon.
Good afternoon.
Please tell the court a little bit about yourself.
Hello, I am Dr. Richard Cannon.
What do you do for a living?
Currently, I am a medical consultant.
What do you do as a medical consultant?
Well, as doctors, we are in the business of life and death, and we only get better by checking each other's work. I believe it is imperative to ensure that other doctors come to the right conclusions. And as a consultant, I do so by reviewing cases.
You mentioned that you're a medical doctor. Where did you go to school?
I got my medical degree from Harvard.
And what experience do you have in the field of medicine?
I worked at Mass General Hospital for 10 years, serving as the director of toxicology. I then became a professor at Midlands Medical School.
Dr. Cannon, you mentioned toxicology. Are you published in the field of toxicology?
Yes, I am. I've published over 50 peer-reviewed articles, my most notable one being about overuse of opiate capsules, entitled One Pill, Two Pill, Red Pill, Blue Pill.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Now, how are you involved in this case?
I conducted a scientific audit in order to determine the cause of death of Miss Genesis Petrillo.
What evidence did you use as part of your audit?
I reviewed the work of Miss Petrillo's treating physician, Dr. Jimin Kwan, and a list of medical records from Miss Petrillo, as well as an eyewitness affidavit.
Can you please explain to the jury what method you used as part of your analysis?
Of course. I used a standard comparative analysis method that allows me to apply my knowledge in the field of toxicology to the data that I was provided regarding Miss Petrillo's death.
Is this method standard in your field?
Yes, it's one I've used in all 35 cases that I've testified in, and it's even taught in Midlands Medical School.
And did you apply the standard comparative analysis reliably to this case?
Yes, I did.
Now, what was Dr. Kwan, the treating physician, what was his conclusion?
Dr. Kwan concluded definitively that Genesis Petrillo died as a result of pesticide poisoning, specifically that she ingested a lethal dose of organophosphate pesticides.
Do you agree with this conclusion?
I agree that Miss Petrillo's most likely cause of death is from pesticide poisoning. However, there are uncertainties associated with this conclusion.
What about Dr. Kwan's conclusion is uncertain?
There is a significant amount of uncertainty as to whether the amount of pesticide ingested by Miss Petrillo was enough to be fatal on its own.
Why is that specifically uncertain?
Well, we do not know the exact quantity of pesticide consumed by Miss Petrillo.
Why not?
It's actually not possible to find this out using the tests that Dr. Kwan conducted. You see, those tests can only indicate whether or not pesticides are present in the body.
So if Miss Petrillo didn't ingest a lethal amount of pesticide, how did pesticide contribute to her death?
Well, as Dr. Kwan noted in his own report, it's possible that the presence of alcohol could have interacted negatively with the presence of pesticide in Miss Petrillo's system.
How much alcohol had Miss Petrillo consumed?
Well, about 2 hours after being admitted into the hospital, Miss Petrillo's measured blood alcohol content, or BAC, was 0.16%. However, It is important to note that BAC can decrease steadily over time as alcohol is eliminated from the bloodstream, meaning Ms. Petrio's BAC could have been considerably higher earlier that night.
How would this higher BAC earlier in the night have affected Miss Petrillo?
Well, as Dr. Kwan also noted in his report, when alcohol and pesticides are present in the body together, they can react negatively, exacerbating the effects of the pesticide. It's entirely possible that Ms. Petrillo consumed a small amount of pesticide, but paired with something like the alcohol in her system, it could have led to symptoms that were fatal.
Dr. Cannon, what's your final conclusion about Miss Petrillo's cause of death?
Given these possible scenarios, my final conclusion is that Ms. Petrillo most likely died as a result of pesticide poisoning. If the dose of pesticide ingested wasn't lethal enough on its own, then its interaction with something like alcohol could have exacerbated those effects and led to her death.
Now, Doctor, I'd also like to talk about some of the limitations of the data you considered. Does the testing you analyzed indicate anything about when pesticide entered the wine?
No, there's no way to tell when the pesticide entered the wine bottle.
What about indications of how the pesticide entered the wine bottle?
It's not possible to determine that either. There's no way of knowing if the wine was contaminated during its initial creation or weeks before ingestion.
Dr. Cannon, can you scientifically determine if any one specific person put pesticide into the wine?
No, it is not scientifically possible to determine if any specific person put the pesticide in the wine bottle in this case.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Cannon, you'd agree with me that it is highly unlikely that Genesis Petrillo died of alcohol poisoning.
Yes, it is very unlikely that Miss Petrillo died of alcohol poisoning on its own.
And you'd agree with me that pesticide poisoning actually explains all of the symptoms Genesis Petrillo exhibited on the night of her death.
Pesticide poisoning is consistent with all the symptoms that Miss Petrillo exhibited. That is correct.
It explained the bronchospasms.
Yes, the bronchospasms that led to respiratory arrest and the eventual death of Miss Petrillo.
The severely contracted pupils.
Yes.
The low acetylcholinesterase levels in her body.
Yes, low acetylcholinesterase levels do show that pesticide is present in the body.
And even the presence of pesticide in her blood work and stomach.
Yes, that is correct. Pesticide was found in her blood work and Miss Petrillo's stomach.
You'd also agree with me, Dr. Cannon, that respiratory arrest was most likely the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death.
Yes, it was the most likely cause that I found.
That organophosphate poisoning was the most likely cause of that respiratory arrest.
Right.
And that the presence of pesticide poisoning in Harper Martini's wine was most likely the cause of that poisoning.
Right, it was most likely, but we don't know how it got there.
Right, Dr. Cannon, you can't tell us when it got there?
There's absolutely no scientific way to determine when it got there.
You also can't tell us who put the poison in the alcohol.
No, there's actually no way to tell who put that poisoning, the pesticide, in that wine.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. May this witness be excused?
Yes. Dr. Cannon, you're free to go. Defense may call their next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense calls Mr. Austin Lewis to the stand.
All right, Mr. Lewis.
How you doing?
Good afternoon, Mr. Lewis.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Austin Lewis.
And Mr. Lewis, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm not working right now, but I used to be the head winemaker over at Peony Estates.
And how did you get into the wine industry?
Wine was the family business. I lived on a vineyard growing up, but I was pretty good at football, and I ended up getting drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. Got myself a couple of rings, and then I tore my ACL. And in that moment, I knew I had to refocus. So I went back to school. I got my degree in business, and I ended up in the family business after all.
Oh, Mr. Lewis, I want to go back to that previous point. Your job as head winemaker. Do you know the owner of Peony Estates, Miss Martini?
Yeah, I know Harper. She was my boss at Peony Estates. Funny enough, though, we also used to work together at Danny Francasio's winery.
Who's Danny Francasio?
She owns the only other winery in Midlands. It's called Rosine Pedro's. Working there was actually my first job after I graduated.
And what was it like working at Rosie and Pedro's for Miss Francasio?
It wasn't good. I mean, she has no clue how to make wine. She felt like her biology degree somehow qualified her to be a winemaker, but there's just a lot more than science that goes into winemaking. Wine, it needs love. I'll never forget once she tasted a Cabernet and she called it a Chardonnay.
Mr. Lewis, what do you know about Miss Martini's and Miss Francasio's relationship?
Well, based on what I saw, it seemed like they got along pretty well when they worked together. But when Harper suddenly announced she would be opening up her own winery, Danny went off her rocker.
Well, you work at Peony Estates now. How did you end up working for Miss Martini?
Harper actually offered me a position as head winemaker. Sampling wine for every batch? I mean, come on, that's the dream. And besides, Harper is an experienced winemaker. I was excited to learn from her.
How did Miss Francasio react when she heard that you accepted Harper's offer?
She was furious. I had never seen her that angry before. She called me a traitor, but it wasn't half as bad as what she said about Harper.
What did she say about Miss Martini?
Once Harper said that she would be opening up her own winery, Danny exploded. And she said she would do whatever it took, no matter how long it took, to make sure Harper's winery fails.
Well, Mr. Lewis, I want to talk to you now about your time working at Peony Estates. Did the winery have any security?
Not that I saw. I mean, we didn't have security guards or anything like that. In fact, the winery was open to the public.
What do you mean by open to the public?
So we would hold weekly winery tours that anyone could attend. Of course, though, we did have some sections that were employees only.
Mr. Lewis, have you ever seen anyone sneak onto the property?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember seeing someone in the restricted area. They were snooping around the kitchen and the bottling area where we kept our unreleased 2019 wine. I still don't know how they got there.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I pass this witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Hi there, Mr. Lewis. Now, I just want to, before we get into anything, talk about something you just said on direct.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
So you said that you saw someone trespassing at Peony Estates. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
And you later identified that person that was trespassing as Lonnie Paris.
Yes, I believe that was his name.
That person trespassing wasn't Danny Francasio.
I don't think so, no.
Well, that person trespassing didn't work for Danny Francasio.
I'm not sure who he worked for, ma'am.
Now, Mr. Lewis, I want to move on and talk about why the defense may have called you as a witness today.
Okay, sounds good.
Mr. Lewis, you blame Danny Francasio for your mom's death.
I'm sorry. I didn't think we would be discussing my mom in trial today.
I know that this is difficult, Mr. Lewis, but you blame Danny Francasio for your mom's death.
Yes, after my mom was fired, she was stressed. She couldn't get any sleep. She didn't even recognize me when I came in the house. And shortly after she passed away, I was lost. My mom was everything to me.
Is that a yes to my question, Mr. Lewis?
I'm sorry if I was unclear. It's a very emotional topic. But yes, I do.
Mr. Lewis, you have nothing but hate for Danny Francasio.
Yeah, I don't like him.
Mr. Lewis, it's not that you just don't like Danny Francasio. You want to see Miss Francasio utterly ruined.
Well, we are rivals, so I mean that from a business perspective.
Now, Mr. Lewis, I want to talk about why this case might be bad for you. You own 10% of Peony Estates.
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
In fact, this lawsuit is the last thing that you wanted to happen.
I don't believe I've ever said that.
If Harper Martini was to lose this lawsuit, the winery could get shut down.
That's a possibility, yes.
You would lose a lot of money.
I think so.
Mr. Lewis, you could even lose your job.
Yes, my job at Peony Estates. Luckily, I do have some investments lined up, and hopefully this will give me the opportunity to open up my own wine sports bar. It's always been a dream of mine.
I pass the witness at this time, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. This witness may be excused.
All right, Mr. Lewis, you may step down.
Okay, thank you.
Defense may call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Harper Martini. May I proceed?
Yes, Ms. Martini.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
My name is Harper Martini.
Miss Martini, what do you do for a living?
I'm a businesswoman. In fact, I recently made it on Midland's 40 under 40 list of successful businesswomen.
How did you get into the wine industry?
I own the winery, Peony Estates. I built my business from the ground up, and it's the second best thing in my life.
The second best thing, what's the first?
My son, Casey, he's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I raised him by myself, and I'm so proud to see him grow into a kind young man.
Miss Martini, you're standing trial for killing Genesis Petrillo, so I want to ask, did you poison him?
No, of course not. Genesis and I may have our differences, but I would never poison someone my son loved.
Did you have any reason to poison Miss Petrillo?
Absolutely not. I would never poison the woman my son loved. I would never put pesticide in my own wine. Because of what happened that day, I've lost two of the most important things in my life. My winery is closing down permanently, and Casey hasn't spoken to me since.
Let's back up, Miss Martini. How did you know Genesis Petrillo?
Genesis was my son Casey's fiance. I've known her for many years, ever since they started dating.
And what was your relationship like with her?
It wasn't perfect. I didn't really support her relationship with Casey.
Why didn't you support their relationship?
Well, Casey was set to inherit all the money from my winery, and whoever married him was going to get it too. It seemed like Casey paid for everything in the relationship. It seemed like all Genesis cared about was money. And that was even before I found out about Paris.
What do you mean when you found out about Paris?
Genesis sent me a voicemail late one night. She told me that she and Casey were moving to France, and I would never see them again. I just know that Genesis was using Casey for a free ride to Paris.
Objection, Your Honor. A lack of personal knowledge. This witness would have no clue as to what Mr. Petrillo was using Casey for at all.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. We're not offering this to prove that Genesis Petrillo was in fact using Casey for her money, but rather to show what Miss Martini believed and how she viewed Genesis Petrillo, which is relevant to rebutting the plaintiff's claim that she had an intent to harm Miss Petrillo.
Objection overruled.
So Miss Martini, you thought that Miss Petrillo was using your son Casey for his money. What did you do?
I could not let my son be taken advantage of like that. I wanted to see if Genesis would still marry Casey if she didn't have our money. So I decided to test Genesis. She could either take a check for $300,000 and leave our family alone, or she could marry Casey and I would take her out of the will.
And how did Miss Petrillo respond to this letter you gave her?
She told me that she loved Casey and didn't want my money, so she threw the letter back. When she refused, I thought maybe I misjudged Genesis. Maybe she actually cared for Casey. At that point, I realized I had to make peace with Genesis.
How did you try to make peace with her?
I spoke to her several times after and even invited her to lunch. I then decided to give Genesis a gift to symbolize the start of our new relationship.
What was the gift that you planned on giving her?
Our new line of wine had not been released yet, so I decided to dedicate it to Genesis. Casey often called Genesis Cara Mia, which means my love in Italian. I named the bottle Cara after their relationship.
And I want to clarify, was the bottle that you planned to give Miss Petrillo bottled on the night of the rehearsal dinner?
No, of course not. I had bottled that wine a month prior and I set it aside. Winemaking is a process. You can't do it a couple hours before a dinner.
So, Miss Martini, to be clear, did you open the bottle of wine at any point on June 7th, 2019?
No. I had bottled that wine a month prior and I gave it to Genesis on that night.
Now, what happened after you gave Miss Petrillo that bottle of Cara wine?
I had the photographer take some photos of Genesis holding the bottle to use as promotion for our new wine. I was thrilled to see how happy Casey and Genesis looked together.
After everybody watched you give Miss Petrillo that bottle of wine, what did you do next?
I was exhausted by the event, and after seeing Casey and Genesis happy, I decided to go to bed. It wasn't until the next morning that I found out about Genesis.
How did you find out what had happened to Miss Petrillo?
I got a call from an employee that someone from our winery had been hospitalized. After seeing how much Genesis was drinking at the rehearsal dinner the night before, I was scared it was him.
And when did you find out what had happened to Miss Petrillo?
The next morning. A friend of Casey's told me that Genesis had slipped into a coma, and a few hours later, I found out that she had passed away.
Miss Martini, I want to talk to you about another person, Danny Francasio. Do you know who that is?
I do. I worked for her for many years at her winery.
When did you stop working for her?
I loved my job, but I always dreamed of opening my own winery.
Did you leave things with Miss Francasio on good terms when you decided to open your own winery?
That was the plan. I had always made clear to Danny that I had goals of starting my own winery, but when I told her, she seemed shocked. Danny got so upset, she started yelling at me, and she threw my final paycheck at me. When I told her my staffing plans, it only got worse.
What were your staffing plans?
I had trained a skillful team at her winery, and I planned on offering jobs to some of the best. But when I told Danny, I'd never seen her angrier.
How did Miss Francasio respond to what you told her about your staff?
Danny told me that if I was going to sabotage her business, she never wanted to see me again and banned me from her winery.
Now, are you aware of how your winery did in comparison to Miss Francasio's?
Yes. According to the press, my winery became more popular than hers. A well-known magazine gave us a glowing review and ranked us the #1 winery in Midlands, while Danny was in second place.
Are you aware of how Miss Francasio reacted to this information?
Yes. The night the article was published, Danny called me, screaming about how I had ruined her. She told me she was planning to make sure that she reclaimed the #1 spot, and that Peony Estates would become nothing, even if it was the last thing that she did.
And after Miss Francasio promised that she was going to reclaim that spot and make sure that Peony Estates became nothing, did you see her on your winery's property?
No, but I did see one of her employees.
When did you see one of Miss Francasio's employees?
A few weeks before the wedding. I saw someone snooping around. I figured they were there for our upcoming wine blend, but as soon as they saw me, they bolted off the property.
Did you see anything else after this person ran off the property?
Nothing else looked different around the bottling area, but as soon as they saw me, they dropped a canister of pesticide.
Did you pick up this canister?
I did. It was the same brand of pesticide that we use, but it was nearly empty, so I threw it away.
Miss Martini, did you bottle the Cara wine before or after you saw this person at your winery?
Before. I had bottled it about a month prior to the rehearsal dinner.
Thank you, Miss Martini. Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Miss Martini, I want to talk about some of the things that you just said on direct, all right?
All right.
Now, you mentioned seeing an employee of Mr. Francasio in your bottling area, correct?
Yes.
You saw him with a can of pesticide, right?
I saw them drop a canister of pesticide.
Now, just to be clear, Miss Martini, you didn't tell anyone about this employee, right?
Well, no, I didn't think it was important.
You didn't think to file a police report, right?
No.
You didn't think to shut down wine production because there was pesticide found in your bottling area?
No, the person just dropped a canister of pesticide.
You didn't throw out those bottles of wine because someone was found in your bottling area with another can of pesticide?
No.
The first time we're hearing of this person is today in trial, is that right?
I think so, yes.
You didn't mention it in the interview you conducted afterwards?
Well, the attorney didn't ask me, so no.
I'm not asking about what the attorney asked. I'm just asking about whether or not you mentioned this person that you saw in your winery. And you didn't, right?
I didn't, because it wasn't asked of me.
All right, Miss Martini. I want to talk a little bit about Casey now. Now, you love him more than anything, right?
More than anything.
You would do anything for your son.
I am very protective of my Casey.
You wanted the absolute best for him, didn't you?
Always.
But you didn't think Genesis was what was best for Casey?
Initially, no, I didn't.
Well, in fact, Miss Martini, you hated Genesis Petrillo.
When I first met her, yes.
You thought she was a bad influence on Casey.
Yes.
You saw her as a threat to your very business, like you said earlier.
Yes, I did.
And in fact, multiple times you tried to talk Casey out of marrying Genesis entirely.
I did. I thought Genesis was using Casey.
Now, Miss Martini, you talked a little bit about a phone call from Genesis that you received on May 12th, correct?
That's true.
And you said earlier that during that phone call, Genesis told you that she and Casey, well, they were moving off to France.
Yes.
But she also told you that you'd never meet your grandchildren.
That's what Genesis said.
And after hearing this, Miss Martini, you wanted nothing more than to stop that wedding.
I got really upset, yes.
Now, sometime after that phone call was made, you actually wrote a note for Miss Petrillo, didn't you?
I did.
You recognize that note if I showed it to you here today in court?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm presenting Exhibit 24 on my screen.
That's granted.
Might take a little bit. There it is. Now, Miss Martini, you can see this, correct?
Yes, I see it.
This is a note you wrote for Genesis, right?
Yeah, I was testing Genesis.
And that's your initials down there, H and M?
That's true, yes.
And this is a true and correct copy of that note?
Yes, I believe so.
Nothing has been changed about it since you last saw it?
Not that I can tell, no.
Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 24 into evidence.
It's admitted.
Now, Miss Martini, in this note, you say to Genesis, this wedding, it can't happen.
Yes.
You say that you need her out of your life entirely.
Yeah, it was a test to Genesis to see where her true intentions lied.
Well, Miss Martini, I know you want to talk about how it was a test for Genesis, but I just want to be clear. You offer her $300,000 to leave.
That's what I did, yes.
And then you say that if she doesn't leave, well, you're going to take her out of the picture the hard way.
Yes, I was going to take her out of the will.
All right, Miss Martini. Your Honor, I'm going to stop sharing Exhibit 24. Now, Miss Martini, let's move on and talk about that wedding rehearsal. Now, before that dinner began, you were already angry, and Miss Petria.
I was upset at Genesis, but I was ready to bury the hatchet.
Well, to be clear, you were angry that she was 15 minutes late.
I was upset. It was an important day for Casey.
So when Genesis finally came, you went right over to her to confront her, right?
Yes.
You told her how much this day meant to Casey.
I did.
And she responded by laughing right in your face.
Yes.
And at that moment, you wanted nothing more than for Genesis to be gone entirely.
That's true.
You didn't want to bury the hatchet like you said earlier.
No, I did.
Well, to be clear, at that moment, you wanted nothing more than for Genesis to be gone.
It was a brief moment, but I remembered what Casey wanted.
Well, to be clear, after she laughed in your face, you went down to that wine cellar, right?
To get her gift, yes.
Exactly. You picked up that 2019 bottle of Cara and handed it off to Genesis Petria, right?
Yes.
And now, Miss Martini, you know quite a bit about wine, right?
I've been in the winemaking business for years.
Exactly. You also know quite a bit about pesticides.
I know some about pesticides, yes.
We are aware that it's virtually impossible to notice pesticide when it's been mixed in wine.
Yeah, you can't see it or smell it.
You know that drinking pesticide mixed with wine, well, it's dangerous.
I do.
It can even be fatal.
Yes, it can.
And you were aware of all of this when you handed that bottle of wine to Genesis Petria, right?
Yes.
Now, to be clear, you said earlier that only Genesis received that Cara wine, right?
That's true. It was a gift.
Everyone else in the wedding party received a bottle called Horizon, right?
It wouldn't be a gift if everyone received the same bottle, so yeah.
And Genesis was the only one to drink that bottle of Cara wine, right?
Yes, it was for her.
And after consuming that bottle of wine, Genesis died the next day.
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor. I now pass the witness.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. At this time, we just ask that Ms. Martini be able to resume her seat at counsel's table.
Ms. Martini may step down. Anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests our case in chief, and we request a 10-minute recess prior to closing arguments.
Let's take a 5-minute, and if y'all need more time, just let me know, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, we'll be in recess.
Your Honor, that's time.
All right, thank you. Was that enough time for everybody?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, we'll wait for everyone to get back. Everyone back that should be back? Anyone not here that should be here? All right, before we begin closing arguments, I'm going to ask everyone to switch back to speaker view. All right, is plaintiff ready to begin closing arguments?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, plaintiff, do you want to reserve any for rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor, whatever time I have remaining after my first speech.
All right, if the timekeeper will keep track of that, please. All right, you may proceed.
May it please the court. Members of the jury, you learned about Genesis Petrillo today. You learned about how Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto fell in love and how they were just about to start their lives together. But you also heard about how the defendant and the victim, Genesis Petrillo, never got along. And that right when the defendant heard that Casey and Genesis were going to be married, well, the defendant knew that she had to do something. Now, at the beginning of trial, we told you to follow the pesticide. Follow the pesticide from the defendant to the bottle to the victim. So let's follow that pesticide. Now, we heard about how the day started from Sam Arnold, the wedding caterer. And he told you how he got there early in the morning and he was setting everything up for what was supposed to be a great day. He told you about how every single day that he was there, all he heard was Genesis and the defendant fighting. Now, that's not the only thing that the wedding caterer told us. The wedding caterer told us that he saw the defendant with a bottle of pesticide heading into the kitchen, right near where all those wine bottles were. And after the defendant was able to put the pesticide into the bottle, she goes out to make a toast to Genesis. The defendant tells the victim, "This is for you, only you." Now, Genesis, not knowing what is in store for her, she thinks that maybe it's an olive branch. You know, maybe they're going to get along. Maybe they're going to be a real family for once. But what Genesis doesn't know is that that bottle of wine is the defendant making the victim disappear, just like she said. Now, we heard from Genesis's best friend today, Angel Rodriguez. We heard about how her best friend was with her all night long. She watched as her best friend went from the giddy, excited bride to being in a coma, convulsing, becoming so bad that her best friend has to call 911 because she knows something's not right. And right when her best friend decides to do that, she decides to go find Casey Soto to tell him what's going on with his fiance. But instead, she runs into the defendant. And when she runs into the defendant, all the defendant says is, "Well, there will be no wedding." Members of the jury, no one even told the defendant who was at the hospital. But she already knew. Now, just a few miles away, Genesis Petrillo is fighting for her life. Dr. Kwan is running every test trying to figure out what is going wrong. And finally, he realizes that it's pesticide poisoning. He realizes that he needs to administer the antidote as quick as possible to try and save her life. But it's too late. Genesis Petrillo dies at 9:27 a.m. At 9:27 a.m., Genesis Petrillo should have been getting ready to be married. At 9:27 a.m., Genesis Petrillo should have been waking up for what should have been the start to her life. But instead, at 9:27 a.m., Genesis Petrillo was dead. Dead because the defendant put pesticides into that wine bottle and gave it to her. Now, members of the jury, the defense came up here and told you a ghost story. What they're trying to tell you today isn't fact, it's fiction. They agree with us on everything that happened that day. They agree that Genesis was poisoned. They agree that that poisoning was done by pesticides. They agree that the pesticides were put into the wine bottle and he ended up drinking what ended up killing him. All they disagree on is the name. Now, folks, in today's case, the only person who came up on the stand to tell you that one of Danny Francasio's employees was at Peony Estates, well, the only person who said that was the defendant themselves. If you look through every single written statement, every single person, not once is it mentioned that Danny Francasio's employee was at Peony Estates. And the reason why is because it didn't happen. Members of the jury, they presented you a story. We presented you facts. In today's trial, we brought a claim of battery against the defendant, Harper Martini. So that means that we have to prove three things to you. One, that the defendant mixed pesticide into a single bottle of Care One, and we did that. And two, that the defendant did so with the intent to harm the victim. And lastly, that the poisoned wine caused harm to Genesis Petrillo. Our job today as plaintiff was to prove that by a preponderance of the evidence that Harper Martini committed battery, meaning that it was more likely than not that the defendant intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo. And folks, we did that. Today, members of the jury, you can grant Genesis Petrillo justice. You can look through the false story that defense has presented to you. And you can look at the facts. You can look at the facts and you can hold the defendant, Harper Martini, liable for her actions. Now, when you return to the jury deliberation room, please remember to follow the pesticide. Follow the pesticide from the defendant to that bottle, to the victim, Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Defense may proceed with their closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. Harper Martini poisoned Miss Francasio's business, so Miss Francasio poisoned her wine. Over the course of today's trial, the plaintiff has told you a story. The story of an evil mother who hated her daughter-in-law so much that she poisoned and killed her. In their rush to blame someone, anyone, for what happened to Miss Petrillo, they failed to see who was really responsible. They failed to see that it was Danny Francasio. Now, members of the jury, I want this to be an overview of the trial. So today we're going to talk about what the plaintiff had to prove, whether or not, based on the evidence they provided, they met that burden. And then we're going to talk about how it was actually Danny Francasio who was responsible for what happened on June 8th. So we'll start at the beginning. The plaintiff brought one claim of battery against Harper Martini, so they hold the burden of proof in today's case. It's their job and their job alone to prove that it was specifically Miss Martini who put pesticide into the bottle of wine and that she had an intent to harm Miss Petrillo. And members of the jury, they failed to meet that burden today. They failed to prove how or when Miss Martini put pesticide into that bottle of wine. They told you to follow the pesticide trail. But if you try to do that, members of the jury, the trail goes cold. Not a single witness could testify they saw Miss Martini put pesticide into the bottle of wine. The plaintiff had the opportunity to call any witness they wanted, and they couldn't provide a single one. The closest thing you heard was from Angel Rodriguez and Sam Arnold. They told you they saw Miss Martini with a canister of pesticide on the day of the wedding rehearsal. But members of the jury, you learned about the winemaking process yourself today. You learned that wine bottling is an extensive process and that the Cara wine had been bottled over a month prior to that date. So even if Miss Martini did have pesticide in her hand that day, there was no way it could get into a bottle that had been corked and sealed, and you certainly heard no evidence from the plaintiff that that had been done. The plaintiff also failed to prove that Miss Martini had any real intent to harm Genesis Petrillo. Now, sure, they told you a lot of bad things Miss Martini said to Genesis Petrillo, and members of the jury were not disputing them. There's no doubt Miss Martini didn't like Miss Petrillo for a long time. She was her mother-in-law, concerned about her intentions. They fought all the time because that's what families do. But you see, all that fighting, it made Miss Martini the perfect person for the plaintiff to blame. But there's a problem with that accusation, members of the jury. And when you go back into that deliberation room, Judge McCormick is going to tell you how the plaintiff had to prove intent. She's going to explain what intent means, and I want you to think back to this moment. Think about what the plaintiff is actually asking you to believe. Not only that Miss Martini didn't like Miss Petrillo, but that she hated her enough to kill her, to kill the love of her son's life in the most obvious way possible, in front of everyone they knew at a rehearsal dinner, where people were taking pictures of Miss Petrillo holding the bottle of wine. That Miss Martini would put pesticide in her own brand of wine, ruining the reputation of her winery in the process. Members of the jury, that's not reasonable. So the question arises, who did put pesticide in that bottle of wine? Who actually benefited from what happened on June 8th? It certainly wasn't Miss Petrillo. We know that she has lost her winery. Her son hasn't spoken to her in over a year. Now, members of the jury, keep in mind, as the defense, we have no burden in today's case. We don't have to prove who poisoned that bottle of wine. All that matters is that the plaintiff had to prove it was Miss Martini, and they failed to do that. But today, we provided evidence that it was Danny Francasio who did it. You heard today, Danny Francasio used to own the most successful winery in Midlands. Miss Martini even used to work for her. Until a few years ago, when she took half of her staff and started her own winery. To put salt in the wound, they were the only direct competitor to Miss Francasio. She was taking business away from Miss Francasio. Now to Miss Martini, that's all it was, business. She was following her dream. But to Danny Francasio, business was personal. She felt betrayed, and you heard from one of her former employees, Austin Lewis, that she would do whatever it took, no matter how long it took, to make sure that winery failed. When Miss Martini's winery surpassed hers, took the title of the most popular winery in Midlands, that was the last straw. Miss Francasio called Miss Martini, told her she was going to take that spot back, and that she was going to make sure Peony Estates became nothing. And that's exactly what she did, because Miss Martini had poisoned her business. So Miss Francasio decided to poison their wine. She sent one of her employees to put a little bit of pesticide in the wine. Anyone who drank it would get sick, and Peony Estates would be shut down, leaving all the property and all the business to go to Miss Francasio. Members of the jury, you heard from Miss Martini. She saw someone on her property she recognized from Miss Francasio's winery. When she tried to talk to them, they bolted. but they dropped an empty canister of pesticide. Members of the jury, that's how the pesticide got into the wine. Now, we're not asking you to believe that Ms. Francasio wanted to kill Ms. Petrillo, no. But you heard today from Dr. Cannon, an expert in toxicology, how alcohol can exacerbate the effects of pesticide. How the alcohol in Ms. Petrillo's system it negatively interacted with that pesticide and caused her to die. She was the collateral damage of an angry businesswoman. Members of the jury, the plaintiff has failed to meet their burden. They failed to prove each and every element of battery, which is why we ask that you find Ms. Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Plaintiff, I believe you have about 2 minutes.
Yes, Your Honor. May I continue, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
A ghost story isn't a defense to battery. And you may be asking yourself, well, how do we know it's a ghost story? How do we know that the defense isn't telling the truth? Well, members of the jury, that's pretty easy. It's because nowhere in Harper Martini's written statement is it once mentioned about Danny Francasio having some employee who was there. So if it was the truth, why wouldn't it be mentioned here? Why would this be the first time that we're hearing about it? It's because it's a ghost story. We met our burden in today's case. We met that the defendant mixed pesticide into a single bottle of wine. We showed that through the wedding caterer who saw the defendant holding that bottle of pesticide walking into the kitchen. We met that the defendant did so with the intent and harm to harm the victim, We did that when we showed you the note that Harper Martini wrote on where she said, I will take you out of the picture the hard way. And lastly, we showed that the poisoned wine caused harm to Genesis Petrillo because the victim is dead in today's case. Members of the jury, look at the facts, not the ghost story. Follow the pesticide. Follow the pesticide from the defendant to the bottle to the victim. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. All right, now we'll have the judges work on their ballots and let me know when they're submitted.
My ballot is submitted, but I think that we should wait to proceed with comments.
Okay, I'll wait for confirmation.
All right, I just got a text saying that we are confirmed and good to do comments.
All right. Great, so if we could all, I guess, go back to gallery view, if everyone wants to log back in. And all right, I guess we'll go in reverse alphabetical. Judge Vinke, if you want to begin with comments.
Sure. So first of all, I just wanted to say this was a really, really good round, and I had a hard time making some decisions at the end. So just know that you're all fantastic, and you are on your way to doing very well into regionals and orcs in a few months. So my name is Emma Vinke. I am a 2L at Baylor. I competed for the University of Minnesota when I was in undergrad for the whole time I was there. I was a closer and I directed experts. So most of my comments are going to be focused on that. But witnesses, I thought you all did a great job as well. I tried to be pretty, I'll just kind of give some bigger picture comments, but I tried to be pretty specific in my comment sheet. So, take that with a grain of salt. Obviously listen to your coaches, but that's just what I picked up on. Biggest thing from this round that made an impact on me was the impeachment of the expert demonstrative. Really make sure that, first of all, if you're going to get impeached, you should always be sure to be accurate on your facts. But if you're making a demo, I love demos. Demos are great. And I was super excited when I saw that, but make sure it's accurate. And I mean, it's better for you to figure this out now than like at regionals or orcs, but really make sure that's accurate. And honestly, I think that your demo still would have been okay if you would have kind of conceded that fact. Like, I don't really think it made a difference, but it made you look less credible as an expert. So that was honestly my biggest point. I thought you guys were all really polished and everything looked great. So yeah, good luck with the rest of the tournament.
Thank you.
All right. Judge Avance.
Hi, I'm Tara Avance. I've got my baby here.
No.
I sat through the whole trial. Not that it was boring, but I was glad she was quiet. Yeah, you guys all did a really great job. Just, I guess, a little bit about me. I graduated from Baylor Law School and competed on several different mock trial teams there. I'm now a prosecutor and have been for 4 years. So my comment is kind of just largely for everybody. I think in mock trial, it's easy, especially with this virtual way that we're doing things, it's easy to stick to your script. And especially on cross-examination, it's really important to listen to what the witness is saying and to feed off of their answers. In criminal law, not only do we not know what the defense witness is going to say, we don't even know who they're going to call. So we have to be flexible, fly by the seat of our pants. And sometimes the best questions can come from statements made by your witness on cross-examination. And so I would just say, a lot of times you can make your case on cross-examination, even as the plaintiff, when you're cross-examining those defense witnesses, you can pull out key pieces of your proof that you're trying to establish. But overall, I thought you guys did a really great job. I was very impressed with both teams, and just like Emma said, very hard to pick a winner. All of you guys did great.
All right, thank you. And just from watching, as you all did your presentations, I am also a Baylor grad, but it was many, many, many years ago. It was back when Baylor Law School was just a shack on campus instead of the palace on the Brazos that it is now. And I was a prosecutor for probably 25 years and now doing criminal defense. And so my comments probably come from more of a real world perspective rather than competition. So in doing your opening statements, my observation was you each did a very effective job of laying out the case that you were going to present. You made your points, you held up fingers, you said, this are the elements, this is what we're going to show. One thing that the defense did that I thought was risky is you said, we're going to show that someone else did this. And so I was listening to see, okay, all right, let's see, did you prove it? And I don't know that you ever got there. So, ultimately I kept thinking, well, if this guy did it, why would he just have poisoned that one bottle? If he was going to ruin this business, why wouldn't he have poisoned more than one bottle? Why was it just the one that she got? So that's kind of what I was thinking. So I don't know that you ever got to your level of proof. And I think when you give this alternative perpetrator, you almost take on the burden. you take on the burden of proving, when you don't have a burden as the defense. And so that was my observation there. On cross-examination, each of you did a very effective job in containing your witnesses. There are attorneys that have been practicing for years and years who do a much less effective job than each of you did. It is an art and not anything that you can study to do. And you each kind of pinned in your witnesses. You did a very good job of asking leading questions, and you controlled your witnesses very well. I wanted to say that the ones of you that questioned the expert witnesses, you did a fantastic job. And Dr. Kwan, I want you to come and testify in every one of my trials. You are better than about 90% of the experts that I call. So I'm going to reach out to you, okay? So you did a very good job. And Mr. Arnold, the Oscar goes to you. With the accent and the staging, you're fantastic. The closing arguments, I think the plaintiff, you had the better case. You had the more emotional, wrenching case. This is ultimately a murder. This person got murdered on her wedding day, by a poison bottle of wine. And, so who else could have done it? And you got that note, and, the note should be huge and big, and you closed with it. And that's kind of your big thing. And so you did such a good job of emphasizing that. So those are just my comments. I know it's late and you guys have worked so hard on this. So good luck. You all did wonderful. You are all obviously very prepared. You're going to go far, and you're all fantastic.
Thanks y'all for taking the time to judge. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for judging.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate
You're all
it.
very welcome. Any questions or any other comments?
I believe that we can tell you guys what schools we're from now, if you'd like to know.
Absolutely.
Plaintiff is from the University of Texas at Austin.
Look them horns.
The defense is from a lot farther away. We're from California. We go to UC Berkeley.
Okay. All right. I don't know. What does UC Berkeley do?
There's.
I know what UT does. But
Thank you so much for judging.
You're very welcome.
Yeah,
Y'all
thanks so much.
Appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank y'all so much. Y'all have a great
Good
week.
luck moving forward. You guys are great.
Yeah.
Yeah.